Off, welcome. My name is Mark Ford, and this is our final 10 questions plus with our UNT Percussion studio. And wow, it's been an amazing series. I just want to take a moment to say, some of the people we've talked to is Gary Burton and Chick Corea. That was our very first session, and what a session it was. Amazing. Keiko Abe, Louis Conte, and Chester Thompson came in with Louis Conte, and they had this banter about their days with Phil Collins, and that was really was memorable. It was amazing. We had the incredible Steve Gadd with us, and his teacher, John Beck from Eastman, popped in and talked with him a little bit at the time. And then we had Roy McCurdy, jazz great and incredible session. And then this semester, we started off with Mika Stoltzman and her husband, clarinetist, star, Richard Stoltzman, goodness. And that was they were coming into us from Japan. And then Peter Erskine, drum set virtuoso, Rainer Carroll from the Los Angeles Philharmonic, Casey Cangelosi, great composer and performer, as you know, Valerie Naranjo from Saturday Night Live, and then Tom Sharp. So we've had really quite an amazing series to enjoy and be with during this time. And our final one here is with Andy, and we suspect he's having some internet issues here. So we're just going to talk a little bit for a moment, and hopefully he'll join us in just a second. One of the things I want to talk a little bit about this time of year, we get a lot of emails, a lot of calls about our camps. Because of the pandemic, I know all of you are not being able, many of your universities can't host any camps on campus, and North Texas is the same way, except they recently came out with a guideline that we could have a commuter camp, which is something that we've never done in percussion. For 26, 27 years, we've had our marching percussion camp, and that's featured many of our alumni students that have marched in corps. Of course, Paul Rennick, our faculty member. Paul Rennick is caption head for Santa Clara Vanguard, and we've had just an incredible series with these camps over the years. This year, we've applied to do a commuter camp, but we haven't received the thumbs up yet that we can do it. So we're still waiting. We hope to announce it really very soon. For our keyboard workshop, which we've done for 15 years, we decided to go to...
There he is.
There he is. All right. While he's checking in, we're going to our... Andy, are you with us? Okay, we'll wait just a moment and see how that... Andy, let me know if you can hear me. Let me know when you're on. For our keyboard workshop, we're doing a virtual session. We're doing the American Percussion Seminar. It's going to be hosted on the Musicon Publications site. It's involving Paul Rennick, Christopher Dean, Quincy Davis, myself, Ed Smith, and a host of other amazing musicians. I hope you can check it out on either Facebook or Instagram or the Musicon site. And we have high hopes of being able to return both of these camps back to campus next year to be able to have any of you that want to come join us for these incredible sessions. Okay, Andy, we saw your name pop up. Are you here?
Yeah, I am here. You know, I swear I thought we were 2 hours different. I was just checking my mail. And I saw your message there, like, we're here. What's up? You know.
Okay. Well,
when did the time change in Texas, or
last week? I think it was last week.
Oh, I didn't know that.
That's what it is.
We don't move here,
Okay.
so I thought you were 2 hours behind me.
Well,
I'm sorry. I'm late for the gig.
We're catching up with you, man. That's what it is. Good to see you.
Yeah, same
we
here.
were worried you had some internet problems, so that's all good. Yeah.
No, we're good now though.
Well, we sure are, and we've just kind of done some introductory things, and we have 77 people on here to speak with you, and I'll just do what we can do here quickly, just to speak a little bit about Andy Narell. Well, I mean, my first gig on steel drums was with Andy Narell at APASIC in, I believe it was 1981 in Dallas, Texas. I was playing double guitar pans with Bob Shatroma's group from North Texas. and Andy was with us at the at PASIC, and I just fell in love with the steel drums and Andy's music, and I'm just so thankful that Andy's been a big part of our program here at North Texas, coming every year or every other year or so, and we've played so much of his music, and just so fortunate to benefit from his experience. Andy's list of credits is extremely long. If those of you that don't own any of his recordings, I tell you now to go out and check out however you get them, through Spotify or Amazon or iTunes or whatever. You need to check out his music. I think it's unique. It's beautiful. It's fresh, and Andy's got such an amazing voice to incorporate steel drums into jazz, into traditional music. It's just really outstanding. So, Andy, I don't want to talk too much longer because we're starting at just a few moments late, but welcome, my friend. So great to have you with us.
Thank you. Thank you for the kind words.
Oh, man.
You know.
Yeah. We had a blast in 2012, Andy. We performed at PASIC, right? We did a concert with this art band and McCallum High School, and we had the jazz band from UT perform with us, and Relative singing, Mark Walker on drums, and Louis Conte on percussion.
Yeah, that was a show, huh?
Man, that was an amazing show. That was awesome.
Yeah. We had 70 people in the band. No, 75. We had like 60-piece steel band with all you guys on percussion. Yeah.
That was quite a moment. That was so much fun. Okay, we're gonna get started.
Etienne Charles were later.
That's right.
Go ahead.
All right, man. So again, we want to welcome everybody that's our non-UNT folks. And again, if you're just joining us, please put your name and where you're zooming in from over in the chat. Well, how this works is that the UNT students submitted questions to ask Andy. 10 were selected, and I gave them to Andy yesterday. And we're going to start off tonight with senior Kohei Sakai.
Hi, it's an honor to have you speaking with us tonight. Thank you for sharing your time with us.
Thanks. Sure.
My question is, could you please talk about your relationship with Ellie Mannette? How did you meet, and how did Mannette's vision for Pan influence your career?
Yeah, you know that I first met Ellie when I was 12 years old, but the story goes really back farther than that. My dad was doing social work with street gangs on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, and that's how I got into playing pan. He and there was a student up from Antigua named Rupert Sterling who was trying to work his way through college, and he was working at the summer camp that they ran, and he wasn't working out as a counselor, so they asked him what else he knew how to do, and he said, well, I know how to play pan and make steel pans. And my dad had seen a band play one time, and he just took a shot with this thing and told him, make a set, try it, you know. And Rupert built one set of pans, taught one group, and everybody wanted to do it. And within a year and a half, they launched 20 steel bands on 2 sets of pans. And he organized the first steel band festival in America. And he saw it as something that it was hooking these kids, you know, and that could be useful in community center work with kids, especially in this type of gang environment. But he could see it already. My dad could see it already going way beyond that. But what he didn't know was that this whole thing had been created by a bunch of teenage kids in gangs, and that history was sort of repeating itself in many ways. And what happened was within a year or two, he started going to Trinidad to find out more about pan, and he just kind of walked right into the golden age of steel band music. This was like 1963, first year of Panorama. The steel bands had come up through the 40s as groups of kids, teenage kids from the tough neighborhoods, the kids that were carrying knives and were fighting with each other, and nobody wanted their daughters going out with them. And that's Ellie too, and those guys. Ellie was in fights when he was young. There's a famous calypso by Blakey called Steel Band Clash, which is about a fight between invaders in Tokyo that actually happened, and Ellie participated in. So, you know, all this stuff, they had gone through this whole thing, and in a 15-year period, along with a whole bunch of craziness and violence as well. They developed all the instruments of a symphony orchestra, and they went from beating rhythm on paint cans to having music competitions on symphony orchestras, instruments that covered from soprano to bass, all of them chromatic, and playing all kinds of music. And Ellie was key to this. You know, Ellie was at the forefront of pan tuning throughout. And if you go back to the 50s and 60s, you'll see his, and look at album covers, you see, even if it's not his band, you see a picture of Ellie on the back cover. You know, they always want to have a picture of a tuner, and they say, who should we get? We'll go Ellie Mannette. You know, he was like the face of pan tuning. And he was part of, he and Tony Williams were both part of TASPO, which was in 1951, you know, that the first group that went to London. And they were the first ones to create, like Ellie made a three drum bass instrument. Tony made a double guitar. These were revolutionary at the time. So you know, my dad was very, you know, comfortable in this kind of environment. He was working in Harlem. He was working on the Lower East Side. It didn't bother him to go out to Laventille or St. James or wherever and meet these people, you know. And he got on that very first trip. He met Ellie. He met Tony Williams. He met Rudolph Charles, Bertie Marshall, the gods of pan, all the heaviest guys. And and he was looking to get somebody to come to the US to make steel pans so this thing could grow. And he was trying to convince one of those guys. And Ellie was open to it. Ellie wanted to get out of Trinidad at that point. And I met Ellie in 1966 when we went down to play at the National Music Festival. My brother and I and 4 of our friends, we had a band. It was called the Steel Bandits. And we played, like, we were playing 2 gigs a week for, you know, I was playing 100 gigs a year by this time. And we went down there to play. We were like the opening act at the National Music Festival before the competition started. And it was a mind-blowing experience for me. You can listen to the recording it was the 1966 festival, and it's like some of the greatest steel band music ever played. By this point, they had become disciplined orchestras. They had corporate sponsors. The whole thing, the whole culture of pan had changed. Like I say, when my dad stumbled into it, it was like the golden age was happening. There was so much innovation happening in the 60s musically. And Ellie came to New York in 1967. My dad brought him. He did the paperwork and got him a visa, promised that he'd find him work. And he lived with us for a while, and I got to watch him, to see what his tuning was like at the time. You know, this was before harmonics. This was before the strobe. Ellie wasn't tuning harmonics. Ellie was tuning with a pitch pipe when he came to New York in 1967, and so that's the kind of the point in his career where I met him. Within a couple of years, he'd gotten onto the harmonics that were Tony Williams and some couple other guys were working with, tuning octave harmonics on the pan. By the time I left New York, which was beginning of 1970, he was on that, and he was on the strobe. And we just stayed in touch all the time for the rest of his life. I mean, I always had a pan on order. I was always like, in those years in the 70s, like I would go back to New York and I'd sleep on his couch and wait because it was the only way to get a pan, was to show up at his house and just stay until he finished it. So his wife, Jackie, she let me sleep on the couch, and and you know, so and then there were the years with Ellie. Basically, you know, I mean, if you look at the evolution of the instrument, when Ellie first came up in '67, we didn't have anything like the state-of-the-art pans of Trinidad at the time. We were like way behind. In fact, our whole band was tuned in the key of E flat, and the first thing he did was make us a set of pans in C, and I had to relearn I had an Invader tenor that my dad had brought me back home from Trinidad, and I was playing it in the wrong key, basically. I mean, I had to flip all the notes around in my head in order to play the same pan. You know what I mean? You following me on that? Anyway, you all can still hear me, right? You're okay, Mark? Okay, good. So Ellie lived in Queens for a number of years, and then he spent a whole period of time where he was on the road all the time tuning. He found that he could actually make a much better living out on the road. And Kathy George was driving him all over the country. And the evolution of, like, in terms of my own playing and the instruments that I played, it was just a shadow of the development of shadowing Ellie's development, because the pan has changed so much since, say 1967, when he started making pans for me. From then till now, Ellie stopped working 2 years ago when he died. He worked up until he was 90 years old, and he never stopped developing and trying to perfect what he was working on. So there was this constant relationship, where I always had an instrument on order. I was trying to get better instruments, whatever the state of the art was with him. I was trying to get a collection of instruments so I could start doing more overdubs with the full range of pans. So, now I go from having a few tenors to having a few double seconds and some guitars and quads and tenor bass, and I'm starting to accumulate instruments, like one at a time, over the years throughout the 80s and 90s. And all through this period, Ellie, he just never stopped pushing it forward. The instruments that he made some beautiful instruments back in the 70s and 80s, but it's a whole other thing now, what it has developed into. And so our relationship was kind of like a biofeedback thing for him, because he could constantly hear the recordings. I was trying to figure out how to make better and better sounding recordings, and he was trying to figure out how to make better sounding pans. And it was all like a circle, because my sound was shaped by his sound, and his sound was being influenced by what he was hearing coming back from me. And so we had a really special relationship that way, where he would come by, he'd come by in the studio and listen on the big monitors and see, and he'd always listen to the records and the mixes when they were done, and we'd talk about the sound of the pans, and so yeah, and I mean, he's such he was a powerful person to know. I don't think I've ever known anybody who was so obsessed with his work. So Ellie could work all day tuning pan, and then go hang out with people and spend all evening talking about tuning pan. And it was he really I really put him up there as one of the great artists of the 20th century, in terms of the impact that he had and what he created in his 75 years or so of work. So and we miss him. I wrote a whole piece about him, and it's on my website. You can, there's a lot more details and about Ellie. I suppose I'm trying to gauge the time I should be talking for each question, and maybe ready to move on to the next one.
That's really great, Andy. And you're right, he had such an energy. His energy level was just incredible. As you said, I concur completely.
When I started overdubbing all this stuff on the steel band albums, I would go out to West Virginia. Morgantown was one of the places I'd go to overdub my pans. And sometimes I worked at the shop, and then I got into, I did a little modification on Chandler Bailey's garage, and that became my studio, But I remember working at the shop, recording something on an album, and it was like nighttime, and Ellie was working on the other side of the shop. He was still working. And not only that, but every time he saw me change, I had to move bass pans back and forth, because I was recording on 2 sets of basses, and every time I had to like move pans, he was in there. He was like 85 years old at the time or something like that, and he was helping me carry bass pans around. He refused to not participate, Wow. So he was a force of nature. I thought he was immortal at one point, and that he'd just be with us, but we're all headed that way at some point.
I know, that was a sad day, though. No kidding.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that, Andy.
Oh, no.
Our next question comes from Kodi Myles. Kodi?
Hello. My question for you is, how does the tradition of teaching steel pan by rote impact the way that we learn the instrument in an ensemble today? And are there any important techniques or skills that we can take from the tradition of teaching by rote to apply to how we teach or arrange?
Yeah, it's funny because it's so geographical, the differences in the way people are playing. Like, 99% of the steel bands in America are reading all the time, and whereas the whole tradition of steel band music that it came from in Trinidad was rote. Nobody was reading. And in fact, but I think what I wanted to call your attention to about that in the question is also that it wasn't always the way it is now in Trinidad. Like if you go to Trinidad now, it'd be a great experience. You go there and you play in Panorama. And now it's gotten to the point where you can find a band where the charts are available in advance. That's starting to happen now. We've been pioneering that. Liam Teague and myself and Andre White and now Duvan and everybody's getting their chart thing together, so that international players can come and fall in the band. So there's sort of a mixed culture now, but it wasn't all this arranger dominated, learn everything by rote in the beginning. The very early steel bands were kind of like one person on a part, and it was group arranging. The players were arranging the music, and back in the 40s and 50s, there wasn't. It didn't become like the 60s was when arrangers started to take over, when the big talent came along, and you had people like Tony Williams and Ray Holman and Beverly Griffith and Earl Rodney, and then Clyde Bradley shortly after that, and it became the era of arrangers, and we're still in that. It's like big orchestra meet. The bands got huge, and you needed arrangers, and you needed somebody who could put this huge sound together. Bobby Muhammad was another one from the South who was the first guy to bring 100-piece band to Panorama. And and what you have down there, what early on, what I noticed about steel bands on an international level was that reading bands could learn music faster, but that didn't necessarily mean they'd get to the performance level faster or better. In fact, I don't know that. I don't think I've ever heard a reading steel band that played as well as the best performances by steel bands that know the music by heart. So I think there's really something we can get from that, and it's in a lot of musical traditions. It's not just steel band music isn't the only kind of group music where people learn by rote and have all the music memorized. Gospel music is like that. Where I've been in gospel music situations where they just sing the parts to everybody, and the sopranos, the altos, the tenors, and the bass, you just learn your parts, and then you do it together, and so I think there's a tremendous value in being able to read and learn music quickly and not have to memorize everything, and there's also a tremendous value in throwing the charts away and playing by heart, and what we start to get into at that point is a lot more focus on how it feels and listening to each other. At least it opens up more potential for that. For me, my goal with a steel band is that the steel band can be a large ensemble that can play with emotion, and to get a lot of people to hit on that. It's like, why are symphony orchestra conductors, why are some of them considered great? Well, they could get 100 people to play with emotion, and to play, with excitement or sadness and all the different range of human emotion that comes out of the music. And so and I think, you know, if you look at the also, there's some other interesting things about the rote learning in that came out of Trinidad, which is that I've seen people learn to play very, very difficult long pieces of music without even knowing the names of the notes that they're hitting, you know. And that's really kind of from a you know, from an educational music, you know, when we're talking about how to teach music to people and stuff, that's really an incredible feat when you think about it. And yet it's very commonplace. You know, I've been in pan yards and I see, like, you know, I'm teaching the section leader and so on, who's the fastest player. And then I see players around them who don't know C from C sharp. And they're just looking at listening to the music and watching them hit the spots. And they do the same thing on their pan. And they can play like a long orchestral piece of music perfectly without, you know, so it's like there's so many different ways to actually, that people memorize or people learn music. You know, for me, when I go in, I'm directing a piece of my music and I've got to show some parts or something like that. Well, a lot of it is I'm just thinking about, I've got the map in my mind, the vertical arrangement. I've got the melody up there and I've got the chord voicings and the bass lines and stuff like that. And I think of the music that way as the whole piece of music. And of course, these are the notes I would choose to play or something like that. Whereas someone else is just like, you know, most of the players are just memorizing note for note. And, you know, they're not thinking, well, that's a B flat minor 7, which is the way I'm thinking of it. You know what I mean? So there's like all these different ways of I think memorizing music, you know, is super valuable, and it frees us up to play the music in another way. It's just the main answer to your question. But I think there's just so many ways of learning and memorizing music. And we all have our different ways. You know, some of us, for me, for instance, I can read the chart, or I can learn it by ear. And those are two completely different mechanisms in my mind. You know, one is reading the melody and the chord changes and getting it as quickly as I can, like that, integrated into what I'm playing. And the other way is like, I have to hear it. I've got to hear the melody. I've got to hear the chord changes and learn it all at the same time, memorize it. And I often find that I can get to memorizing faster that way than I can by reading it and then saying, okay, now I got to commit it to memory. It's hard to put the chart away, you know? So what I'm pushing you towards is to consider not only learning by rote or something by like looking at the chart and then memorizing, but start learning music by transcribing, meaning going from ear to play. It doesn't mean you have to write it down. When I say transcribe, I mean just like learning music by ear, beginning to hear melody, beginning to hear bass lines, beginning to hear the chords, and so on, and be able to, you know, for me, like when I first went into pan yards and it was like, show me the music, it was like, no, don't show me the music, just play it for me. You know what I mean? Don't come over here and show me on my pan, just play it, I'll get it, you know? And it's a much more efficient way to learn for me than to have somebody come over and have to show me on my instrument and so on. So rote, yeah, reading, rote, it's all good, and it's all like, but I think we need to each find our different ways of learning music in different ways, so we're not just locked into this one thing. You know, I think there's a question that's going to come up about what do I see as the problems in college bands, and that's one of them, is that we only read, and it's that one approach. Did I answer the question?
Yes, you did.
Okay.
I think you nailed. They're all silent because like, oh boy, I need to get it all memorized now. All right. Hey, Kailey.
No. I hope Mr. Ford doesn't start doing this.
Oh no, yeah, we actually, you know, all of our panorama charts, and as you know, because you've played with us so many times, they have to be memorized. And we do read some charts depending on how much time we have to prepare it. And John Wooten's on this call too. Probably his band is the same way. but we prefer it. We always prefer to have everything memorized. We just play it better. We're more in control, just as you said. It's more internalized.
Yeah.
It's more expressive that way.
It frees us up even more so to listen to each other and groove together. You know.
Exactly. All right, we're going to go on to Kailey Filben. Kailey?
Hello, my question for you is, when composing for steel band, what are some factors that you like to keep in mind? And aside from the obvious factors such as range, style, and feel of the piece, how do you decide that something would fit well for steel band?
Yeah, that last part is the tough part of the question to answer. How do I decide what's going to fit for a steel band? You know, because for me, it's like all about trying something new. So I really don't know most of the time. There's a certain amount of like, I don't know how this is going to work every time I do something for a steel band. And that's kind of how I want to keep it. You know, I try not to fall in those ruts of like, oh, well, this is sure, I just crank this out because I know this works, you know. And, you know, I find that the thing that keeps me most engaged is to try to be working on something new all the time, something that I need to learn more about, something that hasn't been done yet. So the you know, the obvious things like you say, range, style, feel of the piece. Well, those kinds of things are often decisions that go into like, what's this piece going to be? It's like particularly style or something like that, which often means like, well, what kind of rhythmic foundation is this song going to be based on? And usually, basically, I start writing at the piano. So, and my method of writing is to just try to find something through improvisation. And it might start with an idea from something I heard somewhere, or that, you know, that in some music that really interested me. For me, you know, music is, you know, there was a question about what is the music about, you know, and if I could skip around a little bit, you know, for me, I don't look at pieces as being about something. You know, I'm just looking for something new. I'm looking for something that has a fresh energy for me that I can work on. And that might be a melody, it might be a hook, it might be a bass line, it might be a rhythm, it might be a style of music that I heard from a kind of music I heard from a certain one country or another. I like to listen to music from like all over the world and get ideas from that, and like say, oh, you know, I can get this, I got this rhythm from Cameroon that I like, you know, I want to try to write something around that. And next thing I know, it's inside of a steel band piece, you know. And you know, I listen to a lot of music from all over the Caribbean, from all over Africa, from basically all over the world, and I've, you know, even as far ranging as going back and listening to classical music, which I love too. But there's the, you know, the one of the things that I do think about in fitting for a steel band is whether the players are going to enjoy it is another factor. And who am I writing this for? You know, who's gonna be playing this music, and in what context? And that's, you know, trying to please the players and make because steel band music is so social, you know, and it just brings people together in such a great way that you want everybody to have fun playing the music. You know, so I don't, if everybody's like, you know, if it's a downer to play my piece, but it's a, you know, just somebody else says it's a masterpiece, well, it's not very fulfilling to me. You know, I like the players to be enjoying it and loving it and playing it with feeling, you know, and enjoying doing that. So, you know, and for an example of how that has influenced my writing, for instance, if you can listen to, I did an album called The Passage, and what I started doing with that album was to write jazz solos into the steel band pieces and invite soloists on other instruments. And I had Michael Brecker and Paquito de Rivera and Hugh Masekela playing on that album. And one of the feedback I got from the players afterwards was, you know, it's cool doing that, but you know, we're getting kind of drugged with this thing of like, we play the tune and they play the solo, and then we come back and play the tune. And we'd like to have something more exciting to do than that. And so the whole next album, if you listen to it, that Tatum, and everything since, basically, it just completely changed the direction of how I treat those tunes. I always like put the jazz soloist in there, and then I have the steel band respond with something, with a whole other piece of improvised sounding music, that sounds like it could be, well, now it's the steel band blowing a solo. And you can hear that like on every one of those tunes and since, and it just writing to make for me, like taking into consideration that these are real people and my friends that I was writing for. I had this long running relationship with this band, and actually changed my whole approach to writing those pieces, which doesn't apply to the Panorama tunes. That's a whole other situation, like in those years, recent years, I've written a half a dozen pieces for the Panorama in Trinidad. And that's a whole different approach to like saying, well, I want to make sure, but it's again, it's again saying, I want people to enjoy playing this music, but in a different way, So, as far as how to make this fit well for a steel band, I think, the best thing, if I were to give you advice for yourself, would be to listen to how other steel band arrangers are solving their problems, meaning how do they arrange different kinds of music? How do they put it together? When I wanted to start writing for the Panorama, I listened to Ray Holman and Bugsy Sharp and Clive Bradley and Jit Samaru. Basically, that was like my school for like, well, how do you make this work? And like to actually pick it apart and listen, what kind of bass lines, what kind of strumming and things, how are they voicing the chords, how do they make the band sound? When the band's sounding really good, what's going on here? Dive into it and try to figure it out. You listening to my stuff, you can get a lot of ideas about, solving different kinds of problems, because there's so many different kinds of grooves and styles of music. And, I'm trying to just tackle, different challenges. And so, and then you need to start trying it, you got to find yourself a laboratory, find a band to teach, or get some friends together at school and say, let's try to, I got some arrangements I want to try out. I see Obi Corliss on my screen here, a big picture of Obi. I don't know why that is. Hey, Obi. There you are. So, did I answer the question again? Here we go. I'm going to ask that every time.
Yes, thank you so much.
Sure, pleasure.
Really good. All right, Amanda Millen has a question for you, Andy.
Hi, Miss Narell. How you doing?
I'm doing okay. How are you? You good?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right.
All right. So my question was, what's something you wish more steel bands across the U.S. would do? What are some of the common mistakes that college steel bands make, and how can they be better?
Yeah. So, not in that order, but some of the common mistakes that I see bands making, the most common ones are to play the music quantized. Rhythmically, to play the rhythms too much, like rigid, like the way drumline would play it, or the way classical music players would play it. And we have, the college, what I often come in is like try to sing it and try to play it for them and focus on the rhythm section and get the rhythm section to really show people, the band players, how this music needs to swing and to get to the rhythmic feeling of the music. Another common, really common problem I encounter with the college bands is flat performances. It's almost universal everywhere I go. I show up and we just read. It comes back to reading again. A lot of it, is just like just playing on control, good sound, good tone, but just flat, emotionally flat and dynamically flat. And what I always try to do is spend time with the bands explaining how the dynamics that are in the piece, that the ones that are written and the ones that are not written, which is the problem, make all the difference in terms of a group of people being able to play with emotion. The reason I say the ones that are not written down are the problem is because a lot of the dynamics in the music that I write, a crescendo might take 2 minutes. It's the whole length of a section of the piece, you know, and it arrives. And if you can't feel that together, then it's just going to be a flat performance. And the whole emotional, the potential for emotion in the music is so much coming from the dynamics where as we come up together as an orchestra, you know, and feel each other and hear it and stay, you know, and can do it as the steel band can become like this one big powerful instrument with all these people feeding their energy and their emotion into it. And so, you know, that's kind of something I think that is kind of rampant. You know, I find that everywhere it tends to go with academia. You know, is that we have young players now who are like super talented and they read well. They came out of high school knowing how to read. They can play their instruments, and we're just getting together and playing. It sounds like we're just reading the music, basically. So that as far as like how can we get better? There's so many ways we can get better. You know, and it's not just like rehearsing the steel band. You know, we can all get better. We can get better by all learning how to play in the rhythm section. If everybody in the band knew how to play congas and percussion, we'd be a better steel band. If we came in to the rehearsal early and everybody was just like jamming percussion and a 4-chord jam on the pans and just you know, or at the end of the rehearsals or wherever, we would get better, because that's how we learn to play this kind of music, is by jamming, you know, and getting rhythmically stronger. Playing in the African ensemble, going over to Jose's ensemble, learning how to play Latin music, playing in the Brazilian ensemble, playing in the gamelan. These are all ways to get better at playing pan. We can play we can play scales, we can play harmonic exercises on our own, we can read jazz tunes, we could get a fake book out and just try to learn how to play our instrument, get more comfortable on our instrument. We can get together and have sectionals, which I don't think we have enough sectionals in college steel bands. You know, I don't know if that's emphasized enough. You know, I think the tenor section and the double second section, the guitar section, and the bass section, we should all be getting together and just having, like, you know, making sure that those sections are tight. That's a key thing in orchestral music. I don't think you might correct me if I'm wrong, Mark. I don't think it's done very much in many of the college steel bands. There's just not time for it.
I know we've done it for years and years, Andy. We always have sectionals. That's a required part of the course.
Oh.
And, you know, now I can't speak to other bands, but I do know that we have the depth of the students at this university, just because of the size, that we may be able to have students that can dedicate that kind of time. And it's not really a crazy amount of time. It's just a specific time so the students can really get everything, every detail together, like you're mentioning. You know, and I think for us, it's an important component to success.
Great. I'm glad to hear it. You know, I'm not, maybe I miss a lot of it, and maybe there's more of it going on in the schools than I realize, but I always feel like, you know, it's just so valuable, and it's something we tend to not, you know, often in so many situations, we just don't have the time.
Yes.
People don't have the time to do it that much.
You know, one thing,
and that
Andy,
same goes for, yeah.
One thing I want to share is that we've had so many memories with you in our steel band room and teaching, but one of the ones was, I don't know, several years ago, goodness. And Andy was teaching the band. He was working on a panorama chart, and you know what? He made the band feel better and sound better just by singing. And the way he sang the rhythm was different than we had perceived it on the page, and exactly what he was talking about in that particular moment. And he really always stayed with me, and I always tried to bring that into how we might conceive of a piece beyond what it looks like on the page. You know, it's, getting back to that rhythmic integrity of the style, of course, and the culture of the piece, really. But that's one of those moments, and I think I've always had students, even with the marimba, if I ask them to sing it, they tend to play it better. And so we'll sing when we can, you know, like just like you were doing for us.
Cool. That's great too. I remember, you know, I had a conducting class in college where all we did was sing. I mean, that was like 90% of what we were doing. We just get the charts out and start singing. We had to learn how to transpose. We had to, and you know, I think, you know, if we could do more of that, that's another thing steel bands could do is sing.
It's a big deal.
But there's so many ways to get better, you know, and I think I've answered your question. What do you wish more steel band? Well, yeah.
All right. Next
Okay,
question. Are you happy, Amanda?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, good deal. All right, our next question is from Emiyah McCray. Emiyah? Okay, Emiyah, are you there? She may be having trouble. Let's see. Okay, well, I'll ask the question for her because it doesn't look like, it looks like maybe she's not with us right now. Emiyah has written, where do you draw your inspiration when you're composing your work, Andy? And do your pieces tell a story? She's asking about what's the story of your music?
Yeah, and then she also asked like what advice I would give to if someone who wants to dive deeper into the steel band world.
Right.
So, it's funny, you know, most of where I get inspiration from for composing music is from other music. For me, the whole idea of telling a story. I grew up on musical plays. You know, my mom used to buy records, musicals. Those are the kind of records she would buy and stuff. And I lived next door to a guy who worked in Broadway ticket offices. And when a play had some extra seats, he'd lay some seats on us. And so I used to get to go to see I saw some musicals on Broadway when I was a little kid. And the first play I ever went to was my mom. I was like 5 years old or something. My mom took me to see The Fantastics, which was a small musical play. And but I saw things like My Fair Lady on Broadway and Man of La Mancha, and some of the big hits of the 60s and 50s and 60s. And of course, those told a story. You know, they were telling a story through music. But then I got into playing jazz and listening to jazz, and there's a whole different use of the word telling a story, because jazz musicians talk about that all the time and say you have to tell a story. But it's not a literal story that they're talking about. You know, what it means is when you improvise a solo, it should start somewhere and go somewhere and be like, and sound like something you can relate to. If you listen to it, you can actually listen to someone telling a story, and it has a beginning and a middle and an end, you know, and it's unique and not the same thing. It's not just a bunch of notes strung together. It's not just a bunch of technical stuff showing off. It's that, in fact, that's where you most often hear jazz musicians talk about telling a story, is when they want to distinguish the difference between playing a beautiful solo from playing a bunch of technical stuff to show off, which is the definition of not telling a story as far as in that context. And that always intrigued me. And I felt like, you know, listening to the composers that I really liked in any kind of music, I felt like there's a story there. I can't explain it. It's not meant to be explained in words, but this music reaches out to me and I can follow it. You know, and I learned to kind of listen to, I think we in a way, it's something we can train ourselves to do, is to listen to music in a way where you actually follow it and see the notes go by. To follow an improvised solo and to try to actually follow it as if you were playing it in your mind, and when we start listening that way, it's like each improvised solo can become a unique story. And when I write music, it's basically, it's all improvisation driven. It's I don't ever think about it and it's okay, now I'm going to do that. It's always I'll give myself a structure to work with, and then I'll try to improvise within that structure and create something that I haven't heard before, and that'll become the germ of thematic material that I can use to make it bigger. So I'm searching for something that sounds unique, something that sounds different, something that suggests a story. And it's not, like I say, it's not a literal story, but it's a storyline, and a feeling. And sometimes I write pieces and I have to have pieces like as if they were tacked up on the blackboard in all these different places, and then I put them together in different ways. And sometimes I can write it straight through, which is such a relief when that happens, when I can actually start at the beginning and keep going, and I can just keep going. It doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes I come up with something and it ends up being 4 minutes into the piece, and that's what I started with, And I worked a lot with David Rutter, who's an incredible poet and songwriter, but his lyrics, and I saw some of the lyrics to his songs, and they were like, it's like a piece of paper with like 2 lines over there and 2 lines over there, and everything in all angles and written all over the place, and just ideas and stuff like that. And all of a sudden, then he's telling a story. It's like The Long Time Band. I don't know if that's a song I recorded with him, and it's a long and involved story, and it all started with like one line that's in the middle of the song. I'd never think that would be what the story was. It's just like, if you know the song, that whole song started with, then she started to whine like she never christened, which is a line in the middle of the second verse, of the story. And this is how, music, everybody has a different way to write music. For me, it's like I'll start with and I'll try to get my thematic material together on the piano and be able to play it through. And then as I start, if it's like a piece of steel band music, now I get into the jams and the variations and all that stuff, and I start leaning more on the computer, where I program the drums and percussion, and I start putting bass lines in and the chord progression, and now I just sit and just search and search and search, and I'll like record, like hours and hours of something, trying to find 16 bars that are right. And, I have to throw out 99% of what I came up with. I just keep slogging away until I've got that, I start to put units together and then chain them together. And so it's kind of a combination of things. And as far as where the inspiration comes, it really, it's like life, music, we're here. Why are we here? Why are you doing music? Do you love music? Well, I would hope that would be where you start. The thing that would make you want to be a musician is that you actually love music and it touches you in some way. And why does it touch you? It's not like a formula. It's like we the people that are creating music are like messengers of some great musical energy that's out there, and we're just all part of this. It's like the internet. We're all just part of this worldwide web of musical ideas that are happening. It's a very exciting time because, right now, to be in that mentality, because everything's becoming so accessible. We can listen to virtually every kind of music from all over the world for free now, and be exposed to as much as music as we want without having to go anywhere. And so there's, I don't have to, for inspiration, I don't have to really look any farther than just trying to just looking around and for great music. There's somebody who's great music that's out there. The other thing that can inspire people is like the need to pay their rent. Sometimes, there was some famous, one of the composers that wrote a big hit was like, did somebody asked him in an interview, did you know that song was going to be a classic when you wrote it? He said, no, I just knew it had to be done by Wednesday. Had a deadline. So inspiration can come from a lot of
That's
places.
really good. Yeah.
As far as diving deeper into the steel band world, I would really encourage you to go back and listen to the old steel band music, and I think, for me, one of the things that has really just continually opened my eyes is to like go back to the recordings from the 50s and 60s and listen to all that stuff. It was such a different era, and it was a whole different way of creating. The bands in the 50s were small, and everybody was creating their own parts, and there were already soloists happening and improvising in the 50s, and they were playing much more music from the other islands than they were playing Cuban rhythms and Puerto Rican rhythms and Brazilian rhythms, and there was a huge wave of innovation that came after that in the 60s and 70s, and so and there's also the great arrangers out there, and there's also like things like Kim Johnson's illustrated story of Pan, which is coming out again. It's back in print, which is a fantastic book that I recommend everybody look at if you want to know more about steel band music, because it ties together all the steel band as a social movement with the steel band as a musical movement. And it's like a triple narrative. There are hundreds of photos, and there are hundreds of interviews with people that lived through it, telling it in their own words. And there's Kim's commentary as a historian about the whole thing. And it's like a triple narrative that runs throughout the book, and it's brilliant that way.
Awesome. Tell them the title of the book again. Andy just said
The Illustrated Story of Pan by Kim Johnson.
Very good. Justin Matthews just put it in the chat here, so perfect. Thank you, Justin. Yeah. Awesome, man. Okay, we're going to move on. We got Brandon Topolski has a question for you.
Hello. I was going to ask, could you speak on your specific dedication and research into Latin rhythmic styles of music?
Sure. I think my very first exposure to any kind of Caribbean music was through Rupert, the guy that showed me my first pan when I was like 7 years old. And I started listening to steel bands from Antigua. Hell's Gate and Brute Force were the great bands from Antigua at that time. That was my exposure and Harry Belafonte had just put out an album called Calypso. It came out in the late 50s. That was a huge album. So we had that, and we listened to that music. And then I got turned on to music from steel band music from Trinidad and Calypso music and so on. I think the first time I ever heard rumba, like real roots Latin music, I was 15. And I was playing a session for a commercial in New York. And Ray Barretto was on congas on this gig. And Ray had his there was a whole group of guys, percussionists that were with him. And they were on the breaks, they were playing rumba. They were like playing congas, bongos, clay, wheel percussion. They were singing, and I didn't even know what this music was, but and I moved out to California in 1970, and it was there, like I was in university and stuff like that, and my brother was hanging out with people that were really into Latin music, and it was a big what I'll describe to you is what happened in the Bay Area at this time. There was a huge influx of, it just became a real center for Latin music. There was a lot we could get there. Part of the reason was that some of the great Cuban musicians moved to the Bay Area. You had Armando Peraza, Wilfredo Reyes, Francisco Aquabella. They were all living in the Bay Area, and they were showing all the younger players how it really works, you know. And I started to go and hang out with these friends, my brother and his friends and some, and I would just like play a conga. You know, I just play the simplest part and start listening and making note of like how all the parts fit together, you know. The cascara and the clave and the low conga and the tumba and the conga and the quinto and the vocals and this was like a whole new thing for me about how this music is put together, you know. And I started listening to Eddie Palmieri records and a lot of Brazilian records, and when I started to put my own band together, which was you know, essentially trying to be like a jazz quartet, but with a Caribbean orientation. I got Kenneth Nash to play in the band, and Kenneth was a guy that had been playing congas and percussion with a lot of different people, a lot of different jazz artists, including big names like Herbie Hancock and Weather Report, but all the jazz people that came to town to play at Keystone Corner. He played with a lot of those people. And when, you know, I just, my interest in this kind of music was I just started listening more and more and being more and more fascinated by, you know, all of Caribbean music, but especially the Latin music from Cuba and Puerto Rico and Brazilian music, but also, you know, other stuff that was happening in the Caribbean. And I, when Kenneth left the group, I sort of picked up on that I could get some guys in the band that could really teach me about stuff. And I had Carl Perazzo in my band. Carl Perazzo was a guy, he's playing timbales with Santana for the last 30 years. And he's also a fantastic conga, bongo, timbale, the whole package. And then I had Luis Conte in the band, and I had Jesus Diaz in the band. These guys were teaching me, you know, this is where I kind of got my education in clave, you know, like how, you know, I would be bringing in compositional stuff and they would sort of show me how it works, you know, well, this is how, you know what I mean? It's like you have an idea about how Latin music sounds and you want to compose it, but you don't understand the clave yet. You know, you don't understand this whole foundation of what, and you have to understand rumba and bata and, you know, and all this kind of, all these rhythms and where they came from, and the roots music and now the modern version of that music, you know. And I can still, as much as experience as I've had with it, there's such cutting edge stuff going on down there that like I can go down to Cuba and I'm like lost, you know. I'm like, I have to like, you know, I've literally gone down to jam with musicians in Cuba and I'm like, just like cocking my ear over like to make sure I understand the clave, you know, where the clave and where the cascara is, because I can't understand what the drummers are doing. You know, it's so complicated what they're doing. It's something new I have never heard before. So you just try to latch on and make sure that you're in the pocket with this thing, you know. And that whole, you know, it just became a fascination for me to try to understand more about Latin rhythms, you know. And what I realized is that there's this huge diversity of music. There's a huge amount of music, all these different styles. You go to Cuba and it's like, okay, the religious music, the lucumi, there's hundreds of rhythms that are part of the vocabulary of the religious music, the bata. And then that grew into the rumba came out of that, and the rumba, but it's a street music, you know. And then the danzón, and then all the modern rhythms, you know, the guys that the whole generation, Cachao and Arsenio Rodriguez and Armando Peraza, and these guys that literally created Latin music as we know it. And this is a generation of musicians that are just kind of passing away. Candido just died like last year. He's one of the guys. He was like 100 years old or something like that. And and that's just one thing. And then it went to Latin music got transplanted over to Puerto Rico, and Puerto Rico has the plena and the bomba. And then you go to Guadeloupe and Martinique, and I started going there to play and realizing, wait, there's a whole different kind of music from down here, and they're playing biguine, they're playing mazurka, they're playing zouk, and wait, there's a whole traditional kind of drumming and vocal and dance music that goes behind this. It's called guoka, and there are a dozen guoka rhythms I could learn. And then there's like the Bel Air and Martinique and the Grand Bel Air, and there's all these different rhythmic foundations. And these musicians have all been like heavily influenced by the Haitian bands who were playing the compa. So, you have all these guys coming out of the French Caribbean that are playing, an African influenced music of their own, but they're also listening to America and Haiti and Trinidad, and it's all kind of getting fused together. And then you have the whole music of Trinidad and so on, and the calypso. The calypso is like a huge subject, calypso music, not just musically, but lyrically also. The stories, the whole culture of calypso music, and I'm just still getting down to Brazil, which is like a whole other world down there. Brazil is like 10 countries worth of music. Every region of the country has a different style of music, and I'd be sitting there, go to a little club in New York and sit 2 feet in front of Portinho, who's playing like Baião and Xoxana and Machixe and the Rio Samba and the Partido Alto and all these different kind of rhythms from all over Brazil. And, for me, it was just a love affair with learning, was like to be able to dive into like all these different kinds of Afro-Caribbean, Afro-Latin, Afro-Brazilian, whatever, all the language of these rhythms and all these different styles of music. It's kind of like makes the world turn for me, and it's where I get all my ideas and inspiration is from, delving into all these kinds of music. So, and like I said, I've been really lucky to be able to play with some people who could teach me, I could get an education in the band. The Caribbean Jazz Project was a big educational band that way because, I had Paquito, who I always wanted to play with and listen to and learn from, but the other guys in the band were all like great musicians who were all just like students. We all had the same attitude. The whole band, Mark Walker, Dario Eskenazi, Oscar Stagnaro, those guys were like, we all just wanted to learn more about this whole huge, amazing world of Afro-American music, Afro-Caribbean, Afro everything, You got to put Afro in front of it or it doesn't work. You know what I mean? all this music we're talking about, Latin music and everything, it's all because of Africans, and their experience on our side of this side of the world. The same is true of American music, jazz, spirituals, gospel music, the blues, R&B, pop, most of what we consider American pop music today, jazz, all of jazz. It's the African experience here, So, and I've just been fascinated by that my whole life, basically. Ever since I was a little kid, I was kind of immersed in it.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
That's I think that's a topic you could go on for a long time, Andy. That's awesome.
Yeah, you have to stop me.
No, man, I would just love to hear you go on and on. Hey, our next question is from Denver Nuckolls. He's a master's candidate here, Andy.
I'm Mr. Narell. It's really an honor to speak with you this evening. My question is, when you have beginning pan musicians that approach you, what are some of the most important things, whether it's like technique-based, historically and culturally based, musically based, whatever that you think they should internalize and continue to reference as they grow as musicians and as pan players specifically?
Yeah, the answer to that is kind of a mix. For me, on one hand, I would tell you, my advice to you is like, listen to what interests you, listen to what you like and get into it. You know, go find the music that like, and link it up. You know, you follow the links wherever they lead, all over the internet, all over the world, you know, to like find the music that turns you on, that interests you, and then dive in and listen to it. Try to learn more about it. Figure out, analyze it yourself. Figure out what's going on. Transcribe it. What's happening with the rhythm section? What's going on in the drums? What's going on in the bass lines and the harmonically, melodically? How is it orchestrated? What kind of instruments and voices and whatever, all this stuff, what makes this music go, you know? And that's the first thing I want to know about anywhere where I go, is like, what's the music here? What do people listen to, you know? And you've got to, you know, there's so much you can learn by just like following your own interest. As pan players, I would advise you to listen to dive in and listen to a lot of Lord Kitchener, Mighty Sparrow, Lord Melody, Mighty Spoiler, the great Calypsonians, Blakey. You know, start with Kitchener. If you just start with Kitchener, you've got a lot of work to do. Kitchener wrote a few hundred great songs, you know, and you can listen to the whole evolution of Calypso music from, in his career, from like being 3-chord simple music to like being jazz influenced and the Great American Songbook influenced, kind of like great songwriting with big band horn sections. They were totally influenced by bebop and the jazz era. All that stuff came through Kitchener's music, and he's clearly, for me, the greatest composer of music in Calypso, you know. Like I say, plenty great music in Sparrow. And what you're going to do when you hear all these guys, you're going to hear the great arrangers in Trinidad working too, you know, because a lot of the secret to this was fantastic arranging, you know. And so, and then start like this whole like last question that we were talking about with Latin music and Afro-Caribbean music and Brazilian music and stuff like that. Listen to that stuff, you know, and don't be afraid to, like, you know, just try to figure out how to play all these instruments and a little bit understand what's going on. Most of the guys I know, you know, like from the Caribbean, who are like great musicians, can also, it's like they play their instruments and they can also play drums, you know. And what I mean by drums is whatever, hand drums, you know, percussion, the parts, and they're singing the rhythms. They know all that stuff. So like the study of like to not only study like steel band music, but to study all the Afro-Caribbean music that's like at the base of all this other music. Like everywhere you go, you're going to find if you look far enough into the music, you're going to find that they get to a point where it's African music, where it's like singing and drums and dancing, and to actually dive in and start learning about all these different kinds of music from that point of view, you know, the rhythmic foundation and the melodic foundation of the music, you know, stuff is super valuable. You know, listen to great steel band music, you know, to be you know, listen to the good soloists, you know, but don't only listen to pan soloists. You know, listen to, if you want to be like if you want to learn how to improvise on pan, listen to improvisers. Don't limit yourself to pan players. Just listen to improvisers. Anybody that interests you, whether it's a great jazz soloist or you know, a Bulgarian bagpipe. You know, I mean, whatever it is, you know, find improvisers that you like and that you want to. It's, you know, for me, it was yeah, I want to play like that. I want to play like me, but I want to be like him. I want to be like Miles. I want to be like Coltrane. You know, it's like that was the earliest inspiration for me in music, and it wasn't pan players. You know, so that's the first thing I tell somebody who wants to be a pan improviser is don't listen to me. You know, just go out there and listen to the great improvisers. You know, there's so many of them. You know. And does that answer did I answer the question again? Here, I keep checking.
Yeah, Andy, Denver's conducting our 8 o'clock steel band. And with both bands, we always have a saying, like, if you want to be a great musician, become a great listener first. I mean, that's the key. We've got to be able to hear it for what it is and understand it. Exactly what you're saying. It's really awesome. Yeah. Perfect. All right. Our next one is Sophia Suante. Sophia.
Hello. Hi, Andy. It's been a while.
Hi.
Thank you. My
Hey,
freshman
nice
year.
back drum.
Thank you. It's my favorite album, by the way. It's a great
Thanks.
album. So my question was, do you find yourself transcribing jazz solos, or like when you were younger, were you transcribing them and then transferring them to pan? And like, who were you transcribing, and how would you internalize those solos and then put that jazz vocabulary into your love for steel band and trying to put it in like albums like these?
You know, I have a confession to make to you. I never did any of that. I can transcribe, meaning, you know, I've put a lot of energy into learning how to like learn music by ear. I transcribe stuff off the internet all the time. It's how I like. But for me, transcribing is learning the melody and the correct chord changes and voicings and stuff like that of the composer. Like I'll find a chart somewhere, and then I'll go to the internet and listen to the original by the composer and make sure I have the chords right, and try to get some insight from the music into that. If I want to play Thelonious Monk, I'll listen to Thelonious Monk play his music to get the insight. But I've never been into transcribing solos, and I recommend it. I think it's good for a lot of people. I think there's a lot of great players who did it, and it really helped them. And it's something I just always had resistance to doing, like it's just something I've never I always say, well, yeah, maybe I'll go transcribe a couple of solos, and I never do it. It's just I've always approached it differently and felt like I don't really want to play somebody else's solo. Like the end result in terms of like what you can learn. I'm sure you can learn things by transcribing solos, but I was always so turned off by the other part, the end result, which is like to play somebody else's solo is not at all like what interests me. I think that's the problem is that bottom line is, it's like in terms of motivating myself to do that. And I've been more motivated to like learn compositions and then like learn theory. That's what's come to me later in life. See, when I was younger, I was super lazy. When I was a kid, I didn't practice at all. And then as a young musician, I was very impatient to get out there and play and do my own thing and try to create and all this stuff. And I skipped over a lot of theory that I should have dealt with back then. So what I had to do was like get to my 40s where I've already in having a career behind, I'm in the middle of a career already. I'm already known as a composer and an improviser, and I'm just learning how to improvise is what I feel like. I had to go back and study melodic minor and diminished scale theory, and in order to like start to understand all the harmony that I was like that I was learning and using in my writing, and I didn't know how to solo over my own tunes anymore, so I've had to do some backtracking. But rather than go back and transcribing other people's solutions to the problem, I've been spending more my energy on like studying harmonic and scale theory, and like how to increase my own vocabulary that way, and how to find my own voice by understanding the technique and theory behind all this other improvising that's going on there. And I've tended to try to like internalize other people's soloing ideas by just listening and listening intently to people that I really like, and trying to understand what they're doing from a harmonic point of view, from a rhythmic point of view, from a melodic point of view. If you can understand it, well, you've pretty much gotten out of it what more perhaps than if you could actually just play it and not I mean, if I had to choose between understanding it but not knowing it by heart, and like or being able to play somebody else's solo by heart and not understand it, well, there's no choice for me. It's the first, So, but I wouldn't discourage you from transcribing other people's solos, but I would say, don't skip over the other part. If it would be my advice to people who do want to transcribe solos, is try to stay with it long enough to make sure you understand what's going on. Why, not just how to duplicate the solo, not just how to train your ear to transcribe a solo, but to understand it from a harmonic and scale and rhythmic and all those kinds of points of view. But yeah, confession time. I'm like it's a part of my own education that I just didn't pursue. Was to and often sometimes I wonder, what would my playing sound like now, or maybe should I start? Would that help me? I mean, it's something to consider. Would be to just start memorizing other people's solos and see where it goes. Are you doing it? Are you
Not
memorizing
really.
solos? No?
Not really, no. But I mean, I look at people's solos and see what they're doing, but that's really it.
Yeah.
Ed's shaking
Well,
its head no.
Who-
Ed Smith.
All right. Yeah, Ed, you want to jump in on that?
Hey, Eddie. First of all, how you doing, my friend?
I'm good, man. How are you?
I'm
Good to
doing
see you.
well. Really great to see you, man. Yeah, first of all, you don't need to change anything. You're okay, all right?
You,
As far as
you
that goes.
do you memorize, did you memorize other people's solos?
I did. I would take licks. I would like find some licks that I liked and see
Yeah.
what the structures were. But I wouldn't really learn it solo so entire. Even though I do teach my students to do that somewhat, just to study. It's like sketching from an artist, sketching a Picasso. You're looking at it and you look at it, but I want them to forget it eventually. I want them to just
Yeah.
see what the structures are. But I find it's like learning vocabulary. It's like reading a book. But I think it's most important the ear, like what you're talking about, using the ear. That's the most important part.
Yeah. And, and trying to understand what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Thank you, Ed. Andy, we've got two more questions and a little bit of time left, but we'll start off with Michael Rogers. Michael, are you there?
Yes, I am. I'm with Kohei, so I'm on his computer. Hello, Mr. Narell.
Hey.
So my question is very much about arranging, but you had just talked about starting on the piano and then fleshing it out onto the pans and stuff. So I was wondering if you could kind of talk about, do you kind of think about which pan is going to have the melody and then what's going to be the accompanying lines? And like, what are some tendencies of the instruments that you're thinking about when you're writing for them?
Yeah, I mean, to some degree, I mean, what I start out with is a basic. It's kind of like when I first met Clyde Bradley, the great arranger from Trinidad, and I walked into a pan yard. It was the night before Panorama Finals or something like that, and he was rehearsing the band. And one of the first things he said to me was, Bradley liked to talk about music quick, and stuff like that. He said, all these other guys are all over arranging. He says all melody, chords, and bass line. That's what you start with, and you go from there. And it was true that his music was very efficient that way. He didn't overwrite. He didn't try to go too fast. He didn't try to dazzle you with like a lot of notes. He was a musician. He was a keyboard player. He didn't even play pan. And but he could arrange his tail off, and it was really beautiful music that was really about melody, harmony, and bass line and groove, and if you start with that, I mean, again, in a steel band, it's critical what's happening in the bass. It's just like any kind of music. There's so much that it comes up. So if I'm working on an arrangement and the groove, I always start at the bottom, you know. I used to go, for a while, my lab was Calypso Station in Paris, where I could like work with a steel band on a weekly basis and not have to have any, I didn't have charts. You know, they were learning by rote, and I was creating the music as we were going. I could come in with music that wasn't finished, and I could try things, and that's where I kind of was, you know, between like 2000 and 2015, I was like developing a lot of music over there, like that. I just had players that were willing to do that, learn the music. Sometimes they accuse me of experimenting on humans, because I would come in and teach them a piece of music, and then next week I come in and say, no, forget that. It's all different. It's different now, you know. And you know, it's bottom up in a lot of ways, and top down at the same time, because, you know, we're thinking melody, harmony, you know, this is the song structure and all that stuff. And so it's this, but, you know, once I get the song in my head, then at that point I'd come in and get the rhythm section going and start putting bass and then cellos and guitars and kind of building the harmonic structure and the groove, and then putting the melody on top, and then looking at the whether there's going to be you know, what kind of counterpoint is going to happen. One of the things that I found interesting from the beginning was to experiment with putting the melody in different voices, and this was something that you know, probably the first guys to really, it goes back to all the way back to the late 60s, with Tony Williams and Ray Holman and Clive Bradley and these guys going to Boogsy. It was like to say, okay, we get to a variation, I'm just going to put the melody in the guitars, you know, and write a counterpoint on top. So you have, like, when you do that, now you have 3 melodic lines, you know, and you have your bass line, you have your melody, and you have another counter melody up above answering. And that's a whole other, and then I'd say, okay, now let me put the melody in the bass section and see what happens, you know, and or not the melody, but a solo, you know. You could, like, the jazz solo is now in this voice of the band or in that part of the band. And so what's everybody else doing? And you have a problem to solve now. You've got to figure out how to make this into an interesting piece of music, you know, or something that you like. And there's so many ways to approach it. You know, one of the things I came through a very chaotic, I lived through a very chaotic period in jazz, where everything changed from the structures went crazy at a certain point, you know, and you had people like Ornette Coleman who were saying, okay, the melody is now the counterpoint, and now the new counterpoint becomes the melody, and the melody becomes a counterpoint for that, and it, you know, he called it harmonic approach to music, you know. And you had all these people like that experimenting with different ways of use of counterpoint and melody in music, and thinking differently harmonically. And there was the whole free music thing, and there was, you know, and then I would see people like the Art Ensemble of Chicago, which is like 5 improvisers just creating music on stage, you know, and not having any decision where they were actually going. They would just arrive at it together. And sometimes we would take them a half an hour to really get into something, and then it would be magic, you know. So, you know, I've always kind of like looked at, tried to keep my mind open about different ways of using all the voices of a band and writing orchestra. And there's so many different approaches to orchestral music when you get into that, you know. And if you start thinking of steel band music as orchestral music, or as big band music, or as small band, you know, trying to search for the sound of improvised music mixed with the sound of composed orchestral music. This is kind of like the edge I live on, you know, where I'm constantly trying to you know, look for a different avenue, a different way of doing it, you know, and especially to try to create like music that's composed that sounds like music that's improvised, you know. So I think I've drifted away from your question a little, but you know, so the thing is to really just like, you know, look at all the different ways you can orchestrate for us for in a steel band. What are the different and start listening to what other people have done. You know, you go through a handful of really good composers from Trinidad, or you know, and the people, the cream of the crop of steel band music. You get some really good ideas, but then there's all these other possibilities out there that we need to think about, because we've really only scratched the surface of what's possible with a steel band, you know. And I keep repeating that. I've been repeating that phrase for a long time, but I believe it. We've just scratched the surface. There's so many thousands of things that are possible that we haven't even done yet, you know. So, you know, go for it, put it anywhere, you know.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I was kind of curious if you've ever had like a problem with a tune trying to put it into a steel band, if it just didn't like fill out very well.
Oh yeah, yeah, plenty failure. You know, basically those when somebody sometimes bands tell me, oh, we want to do this tune, I go, please, let's not do that one. That was before I knew what I was doing. You know, I like to get that chart out of circulation, stuff like that. Yeah, no, it happens. It definitely happens. And I've also spent like 2 years like trying to figure out how one big thing, one tune can work, you know. That's when they were accusing me of experimenting on humans. You know, it was like I came in with a piece and it took 6 months to like try to come up with something, and then like I dropped it for 6 months. I came back several months later and said, okay, here we're going in, this is going in a whole other direction now. And you know, but sometimes it works better than others, you know, and you just keep going, you know.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome, thank you. And Andy, we've come to our final question here.
All right.
From Matt Joslin. Apparently he's in the same room with Michael there.
Hello, Mr. Narell. Thank you so much for spending your time with us this evening.
Sure, man. Yeah.
I was wondering just what business concepts about the music industry do you wish you had known earlier in your career, and what might have you done differently, or what advice do you have for those of us just starting our careers?
You know, what I would have done differently was to have, I mentioned it a little earlier, was to have not skipped over so much jazz education, you know, that to get a more solid foundation in like how it really worked, you know, what was really happening, what was Herbie Hancock really doing, why am I just now understanding Herbie's playing, you know, and how to actually do that, you know. I should have, you know, there's a lot of things I got too late in life that I wish I'd started earlier. One of the things that I did, you know, one of the decisions I made early on was that I just didn't want to like be a monochromatic kind of person, you know. I wasn't adapted to like just practicing one instrument all day, 6 hours a day, and doing that and trying to master the stuff. My interests were too broad, you know. I got into like, you know, pan playing and piano playing and composing and engineering and producing and you know, and I read a lot, you know, and there's a lot of things that interest me besides music, you know. And so, you know, though I've had to live with those decisions, you know, and stuff. As far as the business side, the business has so totally changed since I was your age. You know, when I was your age, you would, what I wanted was to get a record deal, you know, play music at a high level, get a record deal, get on the radio. The way you got an audience was you got on the radio. You know, you got a record contract, you got on the radio, and you went out on tour and played, and nothing, you know, it's all like the whole business as we know it is just up and smoke, you know. None of that works anymore. You guys have to figure out a whole new model on how to do this. And look at this pandemic now. We're all like improvising. People are like, we're recording now, like everybody in their own house and putting these videos together. And now there's the house concerts and all this stuff like that. And the record industry fell apart. And now the touring is falling apart, you know. So like, who knows where we're going, you know. My advice to band players is like, hey, learn how to arrange steel band music, you know, because the education is where we're going to be able to support ourselves. You know, it's what I'm doing now at this moment, you know, and it's what I do with a lot of my time is like teaching now. And that's been a way for me to be able to have my music played. It's a way for me to be able to go out and play in public. It's a way for me to pay my rent, put food on the table, you know, all those things. Bottom line things is just like because people want to play pan, you know, and steel band music is happening. People want to learn about music. So, okay, there's a whole new opportunity that's out there. Some of the things the hard lessons I learned along the way was that like the record industry was completely messed up, and the record companies had it all over the artists. That basically the formula when I got into making records was record company pays for the album to be made, but that's an advance against your royalties. So basically, you didn't get any royalties until the record was paid for. The artists were actually have to pay back the record company for the cost of making the record. And who owned the record at the end of the day? The record company. Even though you the artist created the music and you ended up paying to make the record, they own it. All right. And that's the hard lesson that I learned was that when the record company I was working with got bought by a bigger corporation that wasn't interested in what I did anymore, I got records that are out of print. And I can't put them out because I don't own them. You know, they got, the ownership went from one company to another, and now it belongs to BMG, one of the biggest companies in the world, who doesn't care. You know, it's just like an old model of Nike shoes or something to them that's not selling. Get it off the shelf. We don't need it up there. It's taking up too much space. So you know, I learned that one a hard way along the way, but it's, you know, it's a lesson learned, and you go on. So I have a few albums that are out of print, something like that. As far as like the, you know, the music business and you guys right now, I'm like looking to people like you to tell me what's to do next, you know. You know what I mean? Is like, I think the young people are going to figure this out. You know, I'm trying not to get left behind, you know, like, you know, I'm watching like Jacob Collier and saying, you know, wow, you know, that's how we do it now, you know. You have to his music stuff. You guys watching him? Yeah. So, you know, and you know, I for me, a young guy who's really got it together, you know, it's like Etienne Charles, you know, who's from Trinidad, and we're really close, and he's a jazz trumpet player, and he came up through phase 2 playing steel band music with Bugsy, and that was his first music school and stuff like that. And you know, and I watch him and I go, wow, this guy has his business thing way more together than I do at this point. You know? And so, you know, as far as like lessons learned, I think, you know, I've done so many, that's like a whole other like hour sit down that we could have, is for me to tell you all the stupid things I did when I was your age, that, you know, just like crazy stuff, you know, to like try to get going in music, you know, especially being kind of an outlier. I was an outlier because nobody took seriously what I was playing. You know, I mean, you want to be a pan player, and you want to be a studio musician, and you want to be a jazz musician, and all this kind of stuff. And that was like unheard of at the time. You know, that was sort of, and I just went and tried to do it, you know, and but I think that's like a discussion for another day, because I'm going to go on for like a half hour if I start telling funny stories about some of the silly things I did. You know,
I think we just need to get you back in Denton, and then we can sit down and have that talk. What do you say?
yeah, man.
Okay, good deal. Andy, man, you are such a motivation for so many of us, and boy, you've changed my life, my friend. I mean, just well, you know, I think
Yeah.
it's not just the music is so heartfelt and so spiritual for me and people that love it, but also the
Thanks.
fact of your lifelong curiosity about music and about life, and it's just it's all encompassing, and it's just always fresh for us when we're around you, and we just feed off of that and just wish you always the best of everything, my friend.
Thanks.
Yeah.
You too. Thanks for everything, and you're an inspiration too.
Well,
And you know, I just hope I can come back to UNT, man. I miss the vibe and the whole.
I want to build an office for you. That's right. Yeah, we're good.
Yeah, man.
We'll figure that out. Yeah, we got to get through this. Hey, listen, this is our last 10 questions plus for this year. I want to thank my dear faculty colleagues. They are absolutely the best, amazing musicians and dear friends, and all these incredible students who've really been an inspiration to us. Speaking of inspirations, the students have been such great workers and such a vision for what they want to do. And we have been dealing with a lot of things we never thought we'd deal with. But you know what? We're going to get through this. And it's so great that you can kind of close this off for us tonight, Andy. Thank you so much. Give Anita a big hug for all of us as well. And you take care of yourself. And guys, have a beautiful night. Thank you so much.
You too, everybody. Thanks.
Take care.